Welcome to How to Share, a podcast about sharing to the appropriate audience in the best way, at the right time, and how to receive when others share. Participating in a global exchange of ideas is part of what makes us human, according to historian Yuval Noah Harari. But there's a lot of nuance that goes into how we share anything from tools, stories, messages, and more. I'm Wynne Leon, and in this episode, I talk with corporate communications professional Brian Hannon about how to share professional communications. Brian generously shares his experience about how we can prioritize the flow of information. He provides fantastic guidance around being aware of the audience as we communicate to avoid the pitfalls of waiting too long and communicating out of sequence. We talk about the timing of messages, whether it be at work or in our community groups. Being tuned in to when to communicate impacts how messages land. Brian has also worked as a journalist, and he relates how he thinks both news stories and professional communication can benefit from transparency and authenticity. This is a great episode that provides rich insights about how we share professional communications. Join us as we dig into the when, who, and how often we share. Hi, Brian Hannon.
Hey, Wynne, how are you?
So happy to be talking with you. So happy that you'd come on to the How to Share podcast. We've been colleagues and writers for several years, but this is sort of a new venture, and I appreciate you.
I love your topic. I love that you're focusing on it. It's such a great topic, and I can't wait to see where we go. Where you take things.
Me too. That makes two of us. So you have been in corporate communications for 30 years. You were a journalist before then, and so what I want to pick your brain about is how you think about corporate communications and sending those professional communications, whether they be, at work, or they could be for a board that you sit on, or, just a community message. But I want to talk about how we share our professional communications. And I was wondering, as you have thought about corporate communications for all these years, what do you start with? Do you start with who the audience is that you're working on?
Yeah, it really does. Again, to build out like a communications campaign, it's thinking about the different audiences that message needs to go to. And oftentimes it may need to be segmented in terms of cascading it through various organizations. And again, even we were talking earlier about like nonprofit boards, or just, some type of professional communications. It's thinking about the end result. What do you want to happen? You want to have someone act, or you want them to be informed, and what do they need to know? And thinking through how those various stakeholders will need to respond or need to know. I think the thing that I come back to a lot, a lot of roles, I think about my talents, my skills. I wouldn't make a good, like being on the phone, or I wouldn't make a very good salesman. But the one thing that I picked up from that area is thinking client service, putting myself in someone else's shoes, and you're trying to communicate something to them. What do they need to know? Yeah. When do they need to know it? Those are the types of questions, the with them, what's in it for me? Yeah. Everyone has that at their core. So thinking through those messages and thinking through the audience, what matters, is very important.
Right. Well, I love what you said right there, which is that it's based on the action that you want to drive, whether it's information or, a like or whatever kind of feedback that you need from the messaging.
Action is very important, because so much of communications, we're overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. There's so many different bits of communications that are out there. And I think you have to think about what what you're trying to communicate, what you're trying to share, back to your main point, and thinking of the timing of how can that be the most productive for someone. If I'm trying to communicate something to someone, a week late is a week late. That doesn't help them. So there tends to be an action with professional communications, and it's helpful to think about, okay, what do I need them to do, what do I want them to feel. That's an important part of communications too, is what am I trying to engender or get them to feel inside. So I think that's a big part of meeting that goal.
Right. And it's funny because one of my premises on this is why we share comes back to historian Yuval Noah Harari's quote, humans rule the planet because we can participate in this global exchange of ideas. And what you're talking about is sort of the brass tacks of that. I mean, we can participate in a global exchange of ideas. We can just throw messages at each other, but we need the feedback loop, right? And we need what we're trying to drive something and an action and either to create that feeling, to create a coalition, to create some unity. It's not just.
And I mean, that's, yeah, I love what you're saying, because it's not just with professional communication. It's not just me or whoever I'm writing for just trying to force their will. It's an exchange of ideas, and how do we have that flow of communications? How do we use it as a feedback loop? So oftentimes we miss that with communications. It's not one way. It's back and forth, and the more that you have that, the better the life flow or lifeblood of the organization. Then, and a lot of people do miss that part of it.
Mm-hmm. How do you think about timing, like when you share something?
Again, it's changed a lot over the years. I think it's from a timing standpoint, I would sort of throw in there as well repetition, because again, there's so much communications out there that what I try to think of is from the client perspective. Like a lot of the messages that I'm sending out tend to be from a change management orientation. Something's changing. And I know that the people I'm working with, Fridays, for instance, are not a great time. Maybe even early Monday morning's not necessarily a great time. Probably a little less on Monday. Monday might, like I might send something Sunday night, but because Friday it will get lost. And I want to put it in the best possible light. I want to be truthful. I want to be clear. I want to be talking plain language, but I don't want it to get lost. So oftentimes I'll hold a message rather than sending it on Friday.
Right.
And the others.
Sorry to interrupt you on that one, but we were talking about how sometimes people who do want will send it purposely on Friday so that it does get lost. Yes. Like they could say, "I told you that."
Yeah, I mean, politicians, that especially happens. I know that was a joke that came up in The West Wing, the TV show, and certainly with President Trump, I know there have been some things that he's pushed out that probably to the left, it's been an effort to try to get lost or to not have so much focus on it.
Right.
But yeah, I think that is a key thing, and that's where I think I've even had instances where leaders who were fair-minded, who weren't trying to hide it, push things out late Thursday, Friday, and sadly it got lost. It got lost in the hustle and bustle. It's also important to think about what other messaging is happening to the group people that you're sharing with. Like I was volunteering years ago for like a parent teacher organization, and there were some communications that were happening like during busy weeks, like Thanksgiving week or Christmas or holidays. Things like that get lost.
Right.
We have busy lives. So that's where repetition comes in, really trying to hit.
Yeah. That reminds me of
I think.
Sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it reminds me of last week or a couple of weeks ago, I was trying to, a room parent for my son's kindergarten, and I was trying to get people to sign up for Teacher Appreciation Week things. And I sent a message out, like 5 minutes before we had to pick our kids up from school. And nobody responded at all for 24 hours because it was such a stupid time to send it.
Yeah, well, again, there are times when that happens. You got to get it out. And that's where There are tricks. I mean, one of the things I think that helps is to be clear, like especially email. We use email so much, but like in the subject line to really try and hit home so that people see it. It was a running joke. I was in a group, and my boss used to say we need to put every subject line that cake was in the kitchen. If we did that, people would open it right away because they wanted to know where the free food was.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. But you've said a couple times, as we've talked, the idea of repetition. I suspect that we all feel like we're repeating ourselves. We feel sensitive about that, right?
Yeah. And I've led a lot of programs where leaders or project managers at the top, they feel a reluctance to get in front and talk about a project. They don't want to oversell. They don't want to step on any toes. There's some modesty, I think, at play. But I don't know about others, but I think over communicating is a good thing. I think that being plain talk, being willing to talk about what is changing, what's not changing, to say thank you, to recognize others, to legitimately share, here's what I know, and here's what I don't know. I can't tell you, for me anyway, I just think and it goes back to something we've talked a lot in the past as well, authenticity. I mean, like, I'm willing to, someone that puts me first and thinks about the message and what I need to know and speaks to me plainly, I'm all on board. I'm ready to help or to do whatever I can. Where if I don't have that repetition, if I'm caught off guard, if they don't necessarily put me first in that messaging, then it's harder to get enthused or engaged.
And you've said this a couple times about segmenting. So that sort of implies that you can do that better to target a message if you segment your message to particular audiences.
I think it's helpful to think about your messaging and who needs to hear it first. Again, this could be a big corporate thing. This could be members of a committee. I mean, in terms of thinking about, it doesn't have to be an email or a newsletter. It could be just simply, I want to make sure that I'm reaching out to Jane and telling her this is happening. Before I tell anyone else. It's almost a sign of respect. Oftentimes with like corporate messages, my push is, let's talk to our senior leaders, and it may be a meeting, what have you. Let's talk to our leaders. Let's talk to our people managers. Then let's start to reach out to maybe our client-facing employees and employees overall, before we ever go public to customers or to clients. Yeah. And it seems so simple, but I can't tell you the number of times I've seen where employees are getting a message the same time that clients or committee members, what have you, are getting it, and it's disconcerting. It's like, wait a minute, I'm maybe exaggerating a little, but you didn't respect me enough to reach out to me. Now I need to respond to it. People are going to ask me questions. That's how and we talked earlier about this. So oftentimes communications or the sharing of information is a positive. It's a good thing. But when you miss that segmentation, it turns a positive into a negative. So instead of this being a happy message or a good message that I feel a part of, I'm now an afterthought, and the sharing becomes less it becomes a negative, or you have to overcome that negative. So I think that's a big part of the sharing process.
Yeah. Well, over communicating, as you said, and doing it in the right way can make such a difference. But if you segment it out, if you're sending it to the people who need to know first, do you assume that they will pass the message on? I mean, sort of setting the permissions, so to speak.
I try to be clear in, hey, and again, this is like back to when we were talking about what you need to know versus what's nice to know. I actually try to let people know what the process is, that here's what you need to know, just so you're aware and in the loop. We're going to be reaching out next to this group. Or oftentimes with like people managers or committee leaders, we need you to push, like saying we need you to push this message to your team.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, frankly, that's better than me sending something out anyway, because I'm one
Right.
person who they may or may not deal with, but that leader, that
Yeah.
committee chairman, that family member, what have you, it means more coming from them. It means more coming from the people manager. My boss told me about this instead of Brian Schmo, who I don't know.
Right.
So it makes a difference.
Yeah. No, we've talked about you had a journalism background, and I'm just so curious about how communicating as a journalist, which you think about reporting the facts versus telling a corporate or professional message. What's the difference?
Hopefully they match. What I mean by that is, hopefully they marry up to, hey, the truth. And
Mm-hmm.
I think what I've done as a corporate communicator has been less, like often people joke about spinning the truth. I hope it's been less about spinning the truth and more about thinking about that messaging and what is important to people, and position. There's some positioning, obviously. Hey, this is
Right.
going to help you do your job, or this is where we want to move the company to, or this committee wants to tackle this project. Well, I would feel uncomfortable if it wasn't truthful.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what the reporting has done or gave me was asking questions, and that there's no dumb question,
Mm-hmm.
and that need to share. Like I have a deep understanding of holding information is not rarely is a good thing. I mean, yeah, there's HIPAA laws,
Mm-hmm.
there's employee law, there's things like that you obviously want to take into consideration. But holding information back from whatever corporate or home setting, it's rarely leads to good things. I
Right.
think that authenticity it's a different, and I don't know what the word is, but there's I think when you're not being in a corporate setting
Yeah.
or business setting. I think you can feel when you're not being told something truthful.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I think the biggest thing reporting gave me was the ability to ask questions and position the message, how to tell the
Mm-hmm.
story in a way that will get people's attention, to do it
Yeah.
quickly, and to think of it from a
Right.
plain talk standpoint.
Yeah. And it's funny you use the word quickly there. I mean, I imagine that over the 30 years of your career, the sort of type of messages that get sent out are a little bit different, or the format. And let me say, it's because we're not doing memos anymore. I mean, and
Yeah.
think about, or yeah, or I when I turn on a movie for my kids, they'll go, "Oh, it's an oldie movie," if they put the credits first. Because no
Yep.
movie these days has the credits at the beginning. It's always at the end. They're like, "Oh, it's an oldie
Crazy.
movie," and things have changed. Our attention span has changed. So I imagine that you have a lot of examples of that.
Yeah, I mean, just what's a tweet? I mean, how many characters? I
Right.
mean, I saw one thing reference that the other day, that you need to be able to tell your story in a tweet, because that's our attention span nowadays. And I would like to think that we have a little bit more than that, but it is somewhat true. Like, what's your elevator pitch?
Hmm.
Very quickly, in a few lines. I know Vicky talks about her six
Six
word
word stories.
stories.
Yep.
It's that same idea of being able to sum it up very quickly,
Yeah.
and that's been the biggest change. And I see it just in terms of my own speaking. I tend to ramble a little bit, where nowadays you do need to keep it tight. You got to think through. It's all
Yeah.
again, it's all thinking about the end user and
End
thinking
user,
about their needs.
the
So,
recipient. Yeah. That reminds me
yep.
of one of my favorite quotes, which is from Mark Twain. I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one.
Yes, I love that quote. And
Yeah.
it's amazing that it's how many years,
Yeah.
ago he said that, how appropriate
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
today in our very short
Yeah.
culture.
Right.
But yeah, I love that quote as well.
To bring it down, to tell that core message, to do that work, imagining who the end user is, imagining what the action is, and doing it the right time. It's incredibly effective, but you have to parse out all those factors.
And in a weird way, I mean, he doesn't come out and use the word sharing, but that's essentially what he's talking about. I'm sharing something with you. I didn't have the time to make it short and sweet and to present it in the right way, but
Yeah.
at least the intent is there.
Right. And that, I mean, and again, going back to the sort of the core idea of what we're talking about sharing, you know, we can share a lot of things. We want to share effectively. We want to,
Yes, yes,
right? And that's
yes.
sort of the, you know, it's not, we're not going to just, you know, spill our everything and let the end user figure out what the core of it is.
And that is actually a great point, because I've worked with leaders in the past who had, others in mind, but just couldn't decipher it, couldn't cut it
Right.
down enough, and that's a real shame. That they
Yeah.
meant well, but you have to be able to delineate. You have to put it. Think of your user, think of your reader, and put it in words and ways that are going to hit home. That's why so many circles, when you're talking about communications, you hear about telling a story, because it's one thing to sell a product, to try to sell someone, but it's another to put it in, to simplify it. When we're talking about Apple, or I'm thinking of some of the great brands that are out there, what they're trying to sell you, because you've seen the story, the story. And maybe not Apple, but think of products like that, or companies like that. You're able to tell it back before they even are finished with their whatever commercial or their message.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's such a good point, just to think about. It reminds me of this research that I read from Professor Epley from the University of Chicago. He was talking about how we're terrible mind readers, essentially, because we think, if you ask somebody, I'm going to have one of you hum a tune to the other person. And then they ask the person who's going to do the humming, how, do you think that they're going to be able to get what you're humming, name the song? And they're like, oh, yeah, because in their head, they can hear the music and they know. And it's so hard to put out the context of, I don't understand that other person isn't, is doing this out of the blue. And that's the same thing with these communications that you're talking about. Leaders who, want to say something, but they're so stuck in their context, they can't, extrapolate that. We got to tell the whole story.
Yeah, and that's so right. I mean, it's similar to like some of the communications icebreakers you occasionally see, where one person gives a message to another, and it just keeps going down the line, and by the end, it's all over the place.
Yeah.
We know one thing, but how do we get? That's why I say about end user, we got to get in the other person's mindset. It's a certain amount of, with communications, with sharing, I believe there's a certain amount of compassion and sympathy, and putting yourself in that other person's shoes.
Yes. Well, and thank goodness that there's professionals like you that are willing to help us do it. Tell that story at the right time to the right audience and in their shoes. So thank you so much for sharing your.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Wynne. This has been fun.
So fun. Thank you for listening. Our music was written for us by the incredible duo of Jack Canfora and Rob Koenig. For show notes and more great inspiration, see avitiva.com, avitiva.com.